Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are taking on something really massive. We're embarking on an awe-inspiring 4,000-year journey into the heart of the world's oldest continuous religious tradition. We're talking about a tradition that literally shapes the daily lives of over 1 billion people today. It's vast, it's complex, and it is absolutely fascinating. So let's jump right in.
So, what is the world's oldest religion? Well, when you hear that question, Hinduism probably pops into your head, right? And you'd be absolutely correct. But here's the thing. A lot of folks mistakenly picture it as this single, static block of ancient rules handed down at the very dawn of time. But actually, that couldn't be further from the truth. There's no single founder here, no single origin story. The real story is way more dynamic than that.
So the crucial point is that scholars really don't see Hinduism as a single, sudden invention. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a massive, evolving synthesis. Imagine a living, breathing tapestry, one that's been painstakingly woven together over thousands of years, pulling from incredibly diverse ideas, cultures, and traditions to form this beautifully complex new system.
To wrap our heads around this giant tapestry, we've got a quick roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The roots of a religion, 2. The Vedic foundations, 3. The Great Hindu Synthesis, 4. The Classical Golden Age, 5. Empires, Devotion, and Survival, and finally, number 6, Modern and Global Hinduism.
All right, let's start with Part 1, Roots of a Religion, Pre-Vedic Clues.
Okay, so before we even get to the texts in the temples, the absolute earliest roots of this tradition stretch way, way back, perhaps 10,000 years to ancient rock paintings. But to ground us in some sort of timeline, our journey really takes shape across 3 main eras. We've got the Indus Valley Civilization kicking off around 3300 BCE, the Vedic period right around 1750 BCE, and then the second urbanization roughly around 600 BCE.
Now, what's really interesting here is that organizing this massive chunk of history is actually a pretty hot topic. Different academics actively debate over exactly when these specific eras begin and end. You've got scholars like Ninian Smart, Axel Michaels, and Gavin Flood, and they all use slightly different dates and names for the early, classical, and modern periods. Which really just goes to show you, history isn't some closed book, it's a live, ongoing discussion. Now, looking back at the Indus Valley Civilization, they didn't leave behind any elaborate temples that we've found so far, but they did leave some incredibly intriguing archaeological clues. It's like a giant puzzle. We're seeing early swastika symbols, terracotta fertility mother goddesses, and probably most famously, those Pashupati seals. These seals actually show a horned figure sitting in a lotus posture, surrounded by animals, which looks strikingly similar to much later traditions of the Hindu god Shiva.
Moving right along to Part 2, the Vedic foundations, fire, ritual, and order.
So this era really kicked into gear around 1750 BCE, and that was triggered by the migration of pastoralist Indo-Aryan tribes moving into northwestern India. And they brought with them this incredibly profound philosophical curiosity. You can perfectly capture this vibe in their oldest text, the Rig Veda. Just listen to this translation for a second. Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterwards. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Wow, that is just a breathtaking moment of human wonder right there, questioning the very origins of the universe thousands of years ago.
Now, this historical Vedic religion, it was highly structured. The focus was heavily on the worship of nature divas. Think Indra, the weather deity, Agni, the fire god, Soma. And it all relied on these really strict fire rituals performed by an elite Brahmin priesthood. Their main goal was to maintain Rita, or cosmic order. But over time, as these tribes settled down in the Ganges plain and shifted to farming, these elite rituals naturally began to blend, or syncretize, with the native cultures of northern India.
And that brings us to Part 3, the Great Hindu Synthesis, Adaptation and Survival. All right, so right around 600 BCE, India goes through the second wave of urbanization, and it creates massive cultural tension. On one side of the ring, you have orthodox Brahmanism, super strict rituals, Brahmin exclusivity, relying totally on the authority of the Vedas. But rising up to challenge them were the Shramana, or renouncer movements, most famously Buddhism and Jainism. And these guys pushed back hard against those elite rituals. They focused way more on asceticism, personal enlightenment, and big new concepts like karma and liberation from the cycle of rebirth.
Facing the very real threat of extinction, the Brahmin tradition did something amazing. They sparked a brilliant evolution. Instead of just fading away, they adapted. They broadened their services and actually started absorbing those non-Vedic traditions. They took local gods,
those new ascetic philosophies of karma and reincarnation, and their own ancient Vedic rituals, and they wove them all together into a brand new, highly resilient tapestry. And that right there is exactly what scholars mean when they talk about the genius of the Hindu synthesis.
Let's look at part 4 now, the classical golden age, epics and temples.
Starting right around 200 BCE, we see this absolutely massive shift take place. We're moving away from that early historical Vedic religion, with its elite focus and exclusive fire rituals, and we transition into what's known as Puranic Hinduism. And this was a game changer because it was so accessible. It centered around physical temples, deeply emotional devotion to major deities like Vishnu and Shiva, and the soaring popularity of the great epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
You'll often hear this classical period called a golden age, and that is largely thanks to the backing of massive empires, like the Guptas up north and the Pallavas in the south. The Gupta Empire really patronized this new Puranic religion. They built the very first monumental Hindu temples and composed the Puranas to share these epic stories with the everyday masses. Meanwhile, the Pallavas helped spread this Sanskrit culture southward. Eventually, trade routes carried this rich synthesis all the way into Southeast Asia, inspiring literal architectural wonders like Angkor Wat, which is still the largest religious structure in the world today.
Moving on to part 5, empires, devotion, and survival.
So, as India rolls into the medieval and early modern periods, we hit an era of intense political turbulence and foreign conquests. Over several centuries, the whole subcontinent was basically dominated by this constantly shifting landscape of major powers. You go from the Islamic Delhi Sultanate to the indigenous Hindu Vijayanagara Empire, then followed by the mighty Mughal Empire, and later on, the formidable Hindu Maratha Empire.
But here is the wild part. During all this intense political shifting, something beautiful was happening on the ground. A movement called Bhakti just exploded across the subcontinent. Led by poet saints down south, this was all about intense, emotional, totally accessible devotion to avatars like Krishna and Rama. It was so popular, it easily absorbed local tribal deities into the fold. And at the exact same time, brilliant thinkers like Adi Shankara were busy codifying super complex Hindu philosophy. So you've got this deep philosophy on one hand and emotional devotion on the other, both working together to deeply unify the culture, even without a single central political empire.
Now, the period of Islamic rule in India is historically, well, it's complex. It was a dynamic era marked by both deep syncretism and stark conflict. So on the one hand, you had rulers like the Mughal Emperor Akbar. He was famous for religious tolerance, abolishing certain taxes on non-Muslims and even relying on Hindu Rajput vassals. But then, on the other hand, you look at a ruler like his great-grandson, Aurangzeb, whose reign was marked by intense religious conflict, the destruction of temples, and bringing those religious taxes right back. It's just a period of history with a lot of different realities.
But throughout these turbulent centuries, Hindu culture was also fiercely protected and funded by massive indigenous powers. The Vijayanagara Empire in the south really stepped up as a bastion of the faith. They renovated these massive temple complexes and heavily patronized great philosophers. And a bit later, the Maratha Empire aggressively expanded across central India. These empires basically ensured that this ancient religious synthesis didn't just survive the turbulence, it continued to evolve and thrive.
And finally, part 6, modern and global Hinduism.
As we cross into the 19th century, this ancient, multi-layered synthesis finally comes face-to-face with the modern Western world through British colonial rule. And that interaction sparked what is often called a Hindu Renaissance. Reformers really started modernizing the religion, creating movements like the Arya Samaj to refocus on Vedic roots. This newly unified concept of Hinduism was then famously brought to the West by Swami Vivekananda at the 1893 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And today? Well, the results of this long, incredible history are pretty clear. Hinduism stands as a unified, global religion with over 1.1 billion followers worldwide. Which really leaves us with one final fascinating question to ponder. After 4,000 years of constant adaptation, brilliant absorption, and just absolute survival, how will the great synthesis evolve next? Because if history shows us anything, it's that it never stands still. So keep asking those big questions, keep examining the evidence, and above all, stay curious. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.